A compendium of the Bible, a study of the book of First Chronicles. The theme, genealogy and history. The date, 5th century BC. Background, 1st and 2nd Chronicles form one book. In the Old Hebrew Canon, the two books embody many of the events recorded in 1st and 2nd Kings, being devoted to the history of Judah from the time of Saul's death to the Babylonian captivity. They were composed much later than the books of the Kings, possibly during the captivity, and were written for the most part from the priestly point of view. For this reason, First Chronicles began with the most extensive collection of genealogy records in the Bible, the purpose of which is to draw all lines of redemptive history to their focal point in David. Much emphasis is placed upon the dedication and service of the temple and the ministry of the Levites. The account of First Chronicle of Judah under David and Solomon omits certain of the darkest incidents included in 1st and 2nd Kings. The northern kingdom, which is Israel, is not in view in the book of the Chronicles, except as it relates to Judah. Some portions of this book are unique in the historical record. For an example, David's preparation of material for building the temple, found in chapter 22, verses 1 through 5. The division of personal ministering in the temple, chapter 23 through chapter 27, and David's final exaltation to Israel and Solomon in chapters 28 through 29. The book is divided into three parts, three divisions. Number 1, the genealogy of the patriarchs and the 12 sons of Israel, chapter 1, verse 1 through chapter 9, verse 44. The genealogy of Adam to Abraham, chapter 1, verse 1 through 27. The genealogy of Abraham to Jacob, chapter 1, verse 28 through 54. The genealogy of the 12 sons of Jacob, which is Israel, chapter 2, verse 1 through 55. The genealogy of the family of David, chapter 3, verse 1 through 24. The genealogy of the 12 tribes, chapter 4, verse 1 through chapter 8, verse 40. The genealogy of the inhabitants of Jerusalem, chapter 9, verse 1 through 34. The genealogy of Saul, chapter 9, verse 34 through 44. Part 2, or Division 2. The last days and death of King Saul, chapter 10, verse 1 through 14. Part 3, the reign of David, chapter 11, verse 1 through chapter 29, verse 30. David in Jerusalem, chapter 11, verse 1 through 9. Roll of David's men, chapter 11, verse 10 through chapter 12, verse 40. Sin at the ark, chapter 13, verse 1 through 14. The prosperous reign, chapter 14, verse 1 through 17. The ark brought back to Jerusalem, chapter 15, verse 1 through chapter 16, verse 43. The Davidian covenant, chapter 17, verse 1 through 27. The fullness of David's kingdom, chapter 18, verse 1 through 17. David at war, chapter 19, verse 1 through chapter 20, verse 8. Plagues resulting from the sin of numbering the people, chapter 21, verse 1 through 30. The temple begins, chapter 22, verse 1 through 19. Organization of Israel, chapter 23, verse 1 through chapter 28, verse 8. Organization of Israel, chapter 23, verse 1 through chapter 28, verse 8. Charge to Solomon, chapter 28, verse 9 through 21. Solomon enthroned, chapter 29, verse 1 through 25. The death of David, chapter 29, verse 26 through verse 30. This concludes the study of First Chronicles.